Michael Kronberg, Lila Nishmat Sharon's father, Rav David Yitzchak ben Rav Shimon Mordechai Bergstein, Zechunon Levracha. Yahrzeit is the 6th of Elul, and all the shiurim today will be dedicated in Rabbi Bergstein's memory. And this particular shiur continues as last year in memory of Elisheva Frist, Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman, Zechunon Levracha, which her second yahrzeit is today, I believe. I also just want to say a word. Sitting in the shul of the illustrious Rabbi Beryl Wines, Zechunon Levracha, who came in Aliyah in 1997 and had a great history of rabbinic activity and communal activity before his Aliyah, which included at one station, the head of the Kashrut and the OU. Very, very important. Of course, he was a shul rabbi. He was in Florida, but many people remember him from Muncie, setting up a yeshiva Gedola there. He gave smicha to Rabbonim. He was a big Talmid Chacham. And then he came here in 97. And I also say that he had the wisdom to know when to step down here at the right time, because there are rabbis who we know who just don't know when to step down. And then it costs them in terms of their prestige, because you run out of gas at a certain age, and you just have to give over the mantle to someone else. And Rabbi Wein was wise enough to do that here. I'll just say a word. I mean, there were many beautiful espedim at the Levaya and during the Shiva and so on. But one particular anecdote that I think would be appropriate. I know that Rabbi Wein used to say, and many of you have heard this often enough, that Rabbi Wein was a storyteller, among other things, and he said, all my stories are true. Some happened, the others could have happened, the rest should have happened. So this is a story that either falls into one of those three categories. When they were building the Beit Midrash in Muncie for the Yeshiva Gedola, there were contractors, and it was a wood frame building, and one contractor guaranteed the wood for 90 years. And then comes the second contractor, and he guarantees the wood for 400 years. And Rabbi Wein says, I'll take the first one. So they said, why should you take the first one? He says, I don't want to have Jews in Muncie in 400 years. And I like that. I like that a lot. Which he understood that as a Jewish community, even a Torah committed community, a Haredi community, it was everything. Muncie, but it became, Rabbi Wein says, I don't want to see this in 400 years. I want to see them in Eretz Yisrael. And that was the way he thought. And he was very, very, very much pro that which is happening in Eretz Yisrael. That doesn't mean he didn't have criticism of things. We all do, and that's par for the course. But he did make time for allotted time in his lifetime to rabbinate here in Eretz Yisrael and here in Yerushalayim, and it was in fulfillment of a life stream. And Yeh Zechro Baruch, he was an inspiration to me personally as well as one of the great mentors that I had in life in the rabbinic world. A week from this coming Motzei Shabbat, Ashkenazim roll out with Slichot. Slichot is an interesting phenomenon. We know that there are three different customs with regard to the duration or amount of time that we dedicate for Slichot before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. The Sephardim have the maximum. The Sephardim, they already began on Rosh Chodesh Elul, or the day after Rosh Chodesh Elul, and basically they're saying Slichot for 40 days, from the entire duration of Elul, and then the 10 days of Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. That minhag is explained by Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, who was known as the Tur, in the end of the 13th century, as based upon a medrash that Moshe Rabbeinu receives the second set of luchot, or the instructions to carve out the second set of luchot on Rosh Chodesh Elul. Because Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on Har Sinai on Chag HaShavuot, which is Zman Matan Toratenu. But he takes him 40 days, and then he comes down on the 17th of Tammuz, and everything crashes, including the luchot, because of the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf. But then the next day, when Kadosh Baruch Hu threatened to annihilate the entire people and start again with Moshe Rabbeinu gives an ultimatum. He says, if these people are going to be off the radar, I'm out as well. Mechenina mishsifrecha asher katavta. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he prays for 40 days again on Har Sinai, from the 18th of Tammuz until the end of Av. And that culminates with the Rosh Chodesh Elul, where Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Psol lecha shnei luchot avanim karishonim, chisel out the second set of the luchot, and they do a rerun of the 40 days on Har Sinai. It culminates with Yom Kippur, and in Yom Kippur, Moshe Rabbeinu comes down with the second set of the luchot. So this 40-day period of Moshe Rabbeinu receiving the luchot for the second time is now becomes the 40-day season for Slichot. And I'll say a word about the Sephardi Slichot, which there's many advantages. I don't know how many of you have experience with the Sephardi Slichot, but every single day it's the same thing. And every single day there are piyutim, there are poems that are relatively easy for anybody who has basic knowledge of Hebrew to understand. And they are repeated, and the nigunim, they are the same every day. And every day when they say the 13 midot, Hashem, Hashem, Ke'achachum v'chanun, they're blowing the shofar at that time. It's a very, very moving slichot, where nobody comes at 4:35 in the morning so that the chazan should finish up in 15 and a half minutes. Nobody's running the 100-mile there marathon for a gold medal. It is said properly, it is said slowly, it is said emotionally, and usually allocating about an hour for the saying of the Slichot. Yeah?
I had it on channel 14. One man said it, the Sparky Slichot. One man said it, he blew it on heart, and they had to repeat it.
Right. So this was done because in yesteryear, not everybody had a Slichot book. So the Chazan is really the performer, if you use that word. He's the one who's saying it, but the Nigunim are there to have everybody join in. So it begins after the saying of Ashrei, and we'll say a word about what this is all about. There's a poem, Ben Adam Malecha Nirdam Kum Kira, Ben Adam Malecha Nirdam Kum Kira B'tachanunim. What does that mean? It means, man, Ben Adam, wake up, call for petition, for tachnunim. This phrase is lifted out of the book of Yonah. In the book of Yonah, where Yonah goes on the ship, fleeing from Eretz Yisrael, and basically what he's trying to do is escape from the frequency of prophecy, because there's only nevuah in Eretz Yisrael, and Yonah is told to go to Nineveh and deliver a very, very short, brief message. Od 40 yom v'ninveh nepachad. In 40 days, everything's going to be turned upside down because they are rishaim, they are wicked. And Yonah doesn't want to do it. And the reason he doesn't want to do it is because Yonah understood very well that sometimes our right to Eretz Yisrael is not so much because we're the good guys, but because the others are infinitely worse than we are. And if you recall back to Parshat Lech Lecha, Avraham Avinu was somewhat concerned, why should he wait 400 years for the descendants to enter Eretz Canaan? Why can't we just start right now? And Kadosh Baruch Hu tells him, Ki lo shalem avon emori. The sins of the Emorites were not matured enough. They have to sin a little bit more in order for Kadosh Baruch Hu to, from an ethical point of view, drive them out of Eretz Yisrael. They're not ready yet to be driven out of Eretz Yisrael. Yonah understood that sometimes we are here in Eretz Yisrael because of our merit, and sometimes we're here because of the demerits of the other side. And he knew very well that Am Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael didn't really deserve to continue to be there, except that the Ashur nation, empire, they were worse. And because they were worse, so relatively speaking, we were better and we were here. Now, can you imagine if Ashur, Nineveh is Ashur, the capital of Ashur, if they do tshuva? So if they do tshuva, then the balance is going to flip in their side, the Ashur side, and means it's going to register negatively on our side, and we're going to lose Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, he feels that history is going to remember Yonah as the great traitor, as a boged, as a traitor to Am Yisrael. He was the one who brought down the 10 tribes, Malchut Yisrael, in the northern part of Eretz Yisrael. He doesn't want to do it. Now, he knows very well that a Navi, a prophet that refuses to fulfill his Slichot, his messenger, his job, is capital punishment offense. So he flees Eretz Yisrael to escape the frequency of prophecy and figures, all right, I'm out of the pale, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will leave me alone. Where is he going? He's going to Tarshish. You know what Tarshish is? It's Gibraltar. It's the end of Spain, where afterwards you fall off. Because they didn't know yet, like Magellan, that you can continue going and get to Eretz Yisrael the other way. They didn't know that yet. So he wants to go to Tarshish. He wants to go to the furthest part. If we would write that today, you would say he wants to go to Mars. He wants to go to the furthest place that a human being can actually reach. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends a storm in the high sea and teaches Yonah that even without prophecy, he can get you. He can use the laws of nature. And of course, they're all panic-stricken on the boat, and they're all praying to their gods. And Yonah goes down to the belly of the boat, and we read this by Mincha and Yom Kippur. And, it's not exactly Schlafstunde, now it's the afternoon from 2 to 4, do not disturb, I have to take a nap. He goes down because he's depressed and he's withdrawing, and he goes to sleep. And the sailors go down and they say, Ben Adam, Malecha Nirdam, Kum Kira Elohecha. Excuse me, sir, now's not the time to sleep. Now's the time to call to your God. And they wake him up and they jolt him. And he admits that he is the one responsible for this whole storm. And he says, if you just throw me overboard, everything's going to be fine. And they don't want to do it until they're convinced that they have to do it. And when they throw him over, the storm, resides. Just takes over. It just winds down instantaneously even, and so on. The Sfardim pick up on this idea because the Rambam tells us that even though Tkiat Shofar, the blowing of shofar in Rosh Hashanah, is a mitzvah in the Torah, Yom Teruah Yelachem, so the Rambam says, Aval pi she Tkiat Shofar b'Rosh Hashanah Gzerat HaKatuv, even though the blowing of the shofar is a mitzvah in the Torah, Remez Yeshbo, there's actually an allusion to this idea, and that is, Uru Yeshenim Mishnatchem, wake up from your sleep, wake up from your slumber. And that means that every single person is in a spiritual slumber. And that's what a sin is. A sin is taking a break from God and going to sleep. And Rosh Hashanah, we are jolted with the shofar to wake up. And this is a message of Yonah, of Ben Adam Malecha Nirdam. And that's why the Sfardim open up their Slichot with this line, Ben Adam Malecha Nirdam, Kum Kira B'Tachanim. Now's not the time to sleep, but let's wake up. It's a wake-up call. Slichos is a wake-up call. Furthermore, you're getting now the pages. So source number 6 on the second page. One side should be the Menucha, the poem that we're going to do today and next week, I guess. But source number 6, there's a side of sources, and as Rambam of the Laws of Tshuva. And if you just look at the last 3 lines, where it says, "Umipnei inyan ze nohagu kol beit Yisrael laharbot b'tzedakah u'masim tovim." The Rambam is talking about Aseret Yimei Tshuva, the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. And he says, the idea is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts everything on a scale, on Rosh Hashanah. Everybody goes on the scale. And he's not taking our weight in pounds or kilo. He's taking a weight of mitzvahs and averis. And it's going to somehow, you're going to have more zchuyot, mitzvot, and hopefully less avonot, sins. And that should work in our favor on Rosh Hashanah. But what happens if it's the other way around? More chataim than mitzvot, then it's not going to fare out well for us for the next year. But you can also have a scenario of 50%, 50%. And the Rambam tells us Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur is a time to somehow tip the scale in our favor. And therefore, we have a program of upgraded mitzvot during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And he says it in these last 3 lines. Na'agu kol Beit Yisrael laharbot b'tzedakah u'masim tovim. We increase our giving of tzedakah, increase our chesed activities, la'asok b'mitzvot me Rosh Hashanah va'ad Yom HaKippurim yeter mikol hashana. There were things that were spelled out even in a very practical way. I remember Chutz La'aretz where there were many people, and they were certainly covered by halacha, who drank milk and had milk products that weren't necessarily Chol of Yisrael. They were kosher, but it wasn't that it was called Chol of Yisrael. But Aseret Yemei Teshuvah were careful that they only brought in Chol of Yisrael into their homes. I recall back in 1985 when I was with my wife in a vacationing in America. We were here already. We had a simcha. We had a family simcha. We didn't just go to America, but we had an extra day or two. We went up to the Catskills, the holy Catskills, right? And there was a hotel there. And we were sitting around the table by lunch, and everybody's introducing themselves. And I had my off-duty sign. I'm not here to badger anybody about Aliyah. So this couple's from Borough Park, and this couple was from Flatbush, and they were from Flatbush, and they were from Borough Park, and they were from Flatbush, and we were from Beersheba. Beersheba. They almost fell off their donkey, their camel. Beersheba. What's Beersheba? So one couple decided, to explain. I didn't say a word to them. They explained why they can't come on Aliyah. They heard it's very, very difficult to be makpid, to be careful about Chol of Yisrael in Israel. I looked at him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, here in Eretz Yisrael, every cow goes to the mikveh in the morning. There's no such thing as fresh milk that's not Chol of Yisrael. There are confectionery products that are brought in that have Chol of Akum, and it says on the label, Lo ochlei Chol of Nochri bilvad. Fine, but the basic milk products here, I said, if I solve your cottage cheese, you're going to come on Aliyah tomorrow? I mean, I thought I heard every legitimate excuse, but this didn't just take the cake, it took the whole bakery with it. I mean, it was unbelievable. So some people in Chutz La'aretz used to be careful about Chol Yisrael for Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. That was one of the things mentioned in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and so on, upgrading Chumris and so on. So you try to tip the scale. And then he says, in the last 2 lines, V'nagu kulam, on source number 6, Lakum balayla ba'asara yamim elu. People would get up in the night time during these 10 days, ulitpalel b'batei knesiyot b'devrei tachnunim. Does that mean there's a siren?
No, it just means possibility.
The possibility of an alert. So what are we supposed to do? Okay, we're going to wait. We're going to wait until if there's a siren. We'll wait. Okay. We'll wait. So what it is the Chutim are calling people for Slichos. That's what it is. But they're just 3 hours late. They're 4 hours late, actually.
Maybe by then,
Okay, everybody's going to get that. That just tells us that we should be on the alert. Okay, just be ready. There might be a siren. If there's a siren, we're going to slowly. Nobody's going to rush. Okay, we're just going to walk downstairs and to the safe area. Okay, everyone. Some phones coming in a little bit. Okay, everybody's going to get it. That's all. Until there's a siren, we can continue. That's all. Not to panic, because we've had these things already with no siren. That's all. This is just an alert signal. That's it. Yeah. What was that? It was called. It wasn't one of the big famous ones. No, I'm not even sure it exists anymore. It was. We said it was a little frummy hotel. Okay. Well, whatever it was. Yeah. It was in Woodmere, not Woodmere. Woodburn. Yeah, it was in Woodburn. Yeah. Anyway, the Rambam tells us that for 10 days of Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, people would wake up early during the nighttime. This is important. During the nighttime, and go to shul and say Divrei Tachnunim v'Kibushim, which means tefillot of supplication and so on, Ad Sheyeh Or Hayom, until the break of dawn. Which means, the Rambam is telling us 2 things. The framework for Slichos is 10 days. Rambam doesn't know from 40 days. Even though today it's a Sephardi custom for the 40 days of Slichos, the Rambam didn't know about it, neither in Spain when he was young, nor in Egypt when he's later in life. It kicked in a little bit later in history, and then became very, very accepted amongst the Edot HaMizrach. The only ones who've maintained the Rambam's very brief 10 days were the Yemenite community. And I say the Yemenite community, half the Yemenite community, because half the Yemenite community ultimately adopted Rabbi Yosef Karo's Shulchan Aruch, but the other half, that was Rav Yosef Kapach's community, stayed very, very firm with the Rambam, and whatever the Rambam says, that was it, and so on. And therefore, the community, the Yemenite community of the Rambam, that's held with the Rambam's halacha, they only had Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the days of Slichot. That's number one. Yeah.
Why did they choose nighttime?
We're going to get to it. Okay. So the idea was to begin the optimum time for saying of Slichot, as the Rambam tells us, is about an hour before the break of dawn. So it's still nighttime outside. If somebody didn't daven Ma'ariv yet with Kriyat Shema, you could still do it. So for today's purposes, it could have been about 4:30 in the morning, pitch black outside, right? Still dark, because I actually checked. The sunrise today was 6:15. The earliest time that you could put on talis and tefillin was 5:25, and Amud HaShachar was just a little bit before that. So we're talking about 4:30-ish. This is the time that the Sephardi Botei Knesset this morning got up to say Slichos. And the Slichos was said until the break of dawn. And then they would daven Shacharit, and so on. That's how the day started. This was the optimum time. And the Sephardim are actually one of the only ones who still do it, even though Ashkenazim will have Slichot in a week and a half's time. And very, very few are going to say Slichot at 4:30 in the morning. When will Ashkenazim say Slichos? Okay. So that usually means a siren, but I didn't hear. A siren. What? It depends where in Yerushalayim. What happens is it's broken up into different neighborhoods, and until you hear a siren, you don't have to budge. That's all. Those are the rules. Okay, what are you getting? Just getting the.
all live in different places.
Said that. Okay. Right. So we just talked about the Jewish community of Yemen. So that's going to protect us from anything that comes from Yemen, right? That's all. So why the nighttime? So Ashkenazim actually had something interesting. They picked up on the Rambam, 10 days of Slichot of Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, except they abbreviated it. Did not have Slichot 4 out of the, actually, I'll qualify this. The 10 days wasn't really 10 days, but because the Tuesday of Rosh Hashanah is Yom Tov. Do we say Slichot? Does anybody say Slichot on Rosh Hashanah? No, we have a long davening, but it's not Slichot. And then there's Shabbat Shuvah. There has to be a Shabbos in between there, 10 days. And there's no Slichot there either. The Rambam didn't believe that. He believed that there were 10 days of Slichot, including the first 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, including Shabbat Shuvah. There was Slichot, and so on. That was amazing. But nobody does that today, because Yom Tov is Yom Tov, Shabbos is Shabbos. But then there was a further idea. There was a group in the 13th century in Ashkenaz known as the Hasidei Ashkenaz. Hasid, not to be confused at all with the modern day Hasidic movement of the Baal Shem Tov until this very day. Hasidei Ashkenaz were great Talmidei Chachamim who took upon themselves all kinds of add-ons of upgraded type of observances that never really caught on by most of the people, except for a handful of customs. Handful of customs of Hasidei Ashkenaz somehow integrated and made it into the mainstream of halakha. So some of you may have heard of the fact that if somebody is getting engaged to a young lady and they find out the young lady's name is Sarah, and this chassan's mother's name is Sarah. Don't marry a girl who carries the same Hebrew name as your mother. You may have heard this. So some people are very strict about this, and if they're in the shidduch making business, they won't even get to first base on that kind of a shidduch. But if it's a scenario where a shidduch is brewing, and then all of a sudden somebody wakes up and says, hey, how can you marry Sarah? Your mother's name is Sarah. So what they usually do is they'll add a name to the kala. So they'll go to shul, they'll say a special mishaberach of adding of name. So her name is Sarah Malka. So Sarah Malka is not Sarah, and so on. Okay, and the more strict will try to break up the shidduch and say, so this is something, the question is, why did such a custom even enter? What's the difference if the kala, your wife's name, is going to have the same Hebrew name as your mother? So some say that it has to do with kibud aveim, because you're not allowed to call your mother or father by their first name, except you're going to call your wife Sarah. So, and if your mother might be in the house, it might appear as if you're calling your mother by her name, and that's inconsistent with the laws of kibud aveim. That's one reason. A more far-fetched was that in the home where sometimes the young couple lived in the home of the parents, and in a pitch black situation at nighttime, the young man is going to call out for his wife, and the wrong Sarah is going to come. As you're laughing, but this was what was a concern of the Hasidei Ashkenaz. And they said, don't marry a girl who has the same name as your mother. But anyway, so some communities still have this custom until this very day. And some don't. Some just don't. And it's as simple as that. And so on. But there were other customs of the Hasidei Ashkenaz. But one of the customs of Hasidei Ashkenaz was that they actually fasted every single day of Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, like Lahavdil, like Ramadan, except of course they ate at nighttime, because you can't fast 10 days in a row. Except there's one catch. There are 4 days in the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah that you're not allowed to fast. The first 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, can't fast. The Shabbat Shuvah, you're not allowed to fast. And Erev Yom Kippur, it's a mitzvah to eat. That's one of my big chumras, It's a bit mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. So 40% of Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, you're not allowed to fast. So what did they do? They moved that fast back by 4 days, and they said Slichos. So here is where the Ashkenazi idea came in, that we actually have the Rambam's version of 10 days of Slichos, minus the 4 days that you're not allowed to fast, added 4 days before Slichos. Okay, 4 days before Slichos is 4 days before Slichos. And now comes from another angle, another idea. If we're going to say Slichos for 4 days before Rosh Hashanah, let's always begin on Motzei Shabbat. Okay, now if we start on Motzei Shabbat, that means if Rosh Hashanah comes out on a Thursday, then you have your 4 days of Slichos, because Motzei Shabbos means Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Fine, Wednesday's Erev Rosh Hashanah. But Rosh Hashanah doesn't always come out on Thursday, right? There's a Beferish of Jackie Mason. Jackie Mason once said, did you ever notice Rosh Hashanah never came out on time? One day it's early, 1 year it's late, right? Never came out on time. Because people are asking if it's early September or late September and so on. I had this once in a store in Flatbush when I overheard 2 people in January asking when does Rosh Hashanah come out next year. So I looked up and I said the 1st of Tishrei, and the guy said, thank you very much. It always comes out on the 1st of Tishrei. Till he realized what the answer was, right? 1st of Tishrei. So the idea was that if Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbat, okay, so that year there's going to be 6 days of Slichos, because it's always going to start on Sunday / Motzei Shabbos on Sunday. And if Rosh Hashanah comes out this year on Tuesday, first day of Rosh Hashanah is Tuesday, which means Erev Rosh Hashanah is going to be Monday. So you don't have a requisite 4 days before Motzei Shabbos. So we're going to be saying Slichos this year, the maximum. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday. The maximum Slichot is this year. This year. Well, maybe there are many Aveirot to atone for, but so we have to have a lot of Slichos. But so the question is, why did the Motzei Shabbos come in? If you have an idea of 4 days before Rosh Hashanah, because they want to make up the 4 days that you don't fast from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, so 4 days is 4 days. So why have more than 4 days by insisting that it always starts on Motzei Shabbos? So what's so special about Motzei Shabbat? So let's say a word about this. When we talk about Motzei Shabbat, so the original time framework of Slichot, it was an hour before the break of dawn. But then comes the Kabbalists. The Kabbalists introduced an idea that the optimum time for Slichot is midnight. Now, midnight doesn't mean 12 o'clock on your clock. It has to do with relative hours, and it has to do with the division of sundown to sunrise divided right in half. And now you have summertime to add to the idea. So midnight is going to be approximately 20 to 1 in the morning. 12:40 in the morning or 12:35 in the morning will be Chatzot Laila. So there are going to be places in a week and a half's time that are going to say Slichos at 12:30 in the morning. Now, I remember growing up in Borough Park and going to hear Moshe Kosovitsky in 1962, 63, and 64. I remember hearing Moshe Kosovitsky, and he would say Slichos from 1 in the morning to 4 in the morning. Because, in America, Sunday is Shabbat Sheni Shel Goliot, right? You don't work on Sunday. So you can run the Slichos for 3 hours. 3 hours. And 1,700 people came to hear it. The place was packed. And didn't leave. Exactly. And it was a production, that Slichos. So that's the Slichos of the midnight Slichos. But then modernity started entering into the picture, modernity/convenience, and saying people aren't coming to shul, a lot of people are missing Slichos, and they weren't saying it Sunday morning because the shuls were running it at midnight. So they started running it earlier, 10, 11 o'clock, 10:30, 10 o'clock. And now you go to many, many shuls, and you're going to see that the Slichot for Motzei Shabbat is going to be at 10 o'clock, or 10:30 for that matter, whatever. So Rav Moshe Feinstein already has a tshuva responsum. Are you allowed to say Slichos at 10 o'clock at night? Why? What's the question? From a halachic point of view, there's no issue whatsoever. You can daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu whenever you feel like. But there is a Kabbalistic idea that from sundown until midnight, it's an inappropriate time to bang on the doors to God with tefillah, with tachnunim. Inappropriate. It's not what's called an 8 ratzon. Yeah. The event that has ended, right? The event that didn't start has ended, right? The event that didn't start has ended, right? Baruch Hashem, we didn't move. The idea that from sundown until midnight is not called 8 ratzon has roots in Chazal. It has roots in the Gemara, even though I mentioned it's a Kabbalistic idea, which means it could be from the Arizal, late Middle Ages, up until today. Hasidim have picked up on many of the Kabbalistic ideas. But the Gemara tells us something fascinating about David HaMelech. That David HaMelech had an alarm clock. An alarm clock? What kind of alarm clock? Was it digital? I mean, what exactly how did it work? Battery operated? It was a harp. It was a harp that was stationed at his window in a certain angle that when the wind blew at midnight, he would wake up. He would wake up and start saying Tehillim, Tehilot v'tishbachot HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he said that he was better than all the other kings. All the other kings slept late. And that's a Mishnah in Masechet Brachot with regard to what is called uvkumecha for purposes of getting up for Kriyat Shema in the morning. So the Mishnah says you can say it until 3 hours of the daytime because B'nai Melachim, royal family people, they slept late. They didn't have to get up first thing in the morning to go to work. So they were able to sleep until 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's called uvkumecha. So you can read Kriyat Shema till that time. Fine. The idea of the morning, So David HaMelech says, the Gentile kings would wake up deep into the morning. I would wake up in the middle of the night and say Tehillim Takadosh Baruch Hu. As it says in Tehillim, Ura chvodi, ura hanevel v'chinor, a'ira shachar. Wake up, my honor. Ura chvodi. He's talking to himself. Ura hanevel v'chinor. It was the harp that woke me up. That alarm clock. A'ira shachar. I will awake in the morning. I'm up already. I'm up already at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. I beat the shachar to wake up. A'ira shachar. So the Kabbalah said, this is the time to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at those hours from midnight on. And they introduced the idea that Slichot, not just the first one, but every night of Slichos is said at midnight. So you have the Sephardi custom of Slichos about an hour before break of dawn, what we call Ashmoret HaBoker. Then you have the Kabbalistic idea of having Slichot at midnight. And then you have the watered down Ashkenazi custom that says, all right, we're not saying Slichos for 40 days. We're saying Slichos in accordance with the Rambam's 10-day schedule. But we're not going to say Slichos for the 4 days that we cannot fast, 2 days Rosh Hashanah, 1 day Shabbat Shuvah, and 1 day Erev Yom Kippur, but we'll tack on an additional 4 days before Rosh Hashanah, provided that we can start on Motzei Shabbat. I didn't explain why that's important. We're getting to that. Provided that it starts with Motzei Shabbat, and if Rosh Hashanah doesn't fall out on a Thursday in a particular year, we'll still start on Motzei Shabbat, and we'll continue saying for 6 days, 7 days, whatever it is, that will say Slichot of a particular year, but we will say Slichot for the first time on Chatzot at midnight, in accordance with the Kabbalists. But with regard to the rest of it, we'll just tack it on before Shachris, whenever we're davening Shachris, which means if it's a 7:30 minyan, so they'll tell people, come for Slichos at 10 after 7, and we'll then dedicate 20 minutes to Slichos. If it's an 8 o'clock minyan, come at 20 to 8, and we'll say Slichos. And if you go to the Shtiblach in Katamon for the 10 in the morning minyan, you'll be saying Slichos at 9:30 in the morning, and so on. I got news for you. Slichos was never made for daytime hours. It's always a nighttime. And we're going to see why in the poem of the first Slichot. Yeah. It's a minhag. Rambam uses the word nahagu. The whole business of Slichos is an upgrade of our tefillah, because in the days of Aseret Mitzvah, let's just call it Yomim Noraim, big time, we want to tip the scale just in case our personal chart is limping towards the Aveira side. You want to somehow tip the scale. I mean, so much so, there's a custom that we know, it's more than a custom, it's a halacha of Kiddush Levana that we say after Rosh Chodesh. Also, it's a Motzei Shabbos type of thing, but doesn't have to be Motzei Shabbos. There's a custom that for Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah, we wait with Kiddush Levana till after Yom Kippur. You walk out of shul after Yom Kippur, you feel you're completely clean, not one Aveira. Start with a mitzvah of Kiddush Levana. The Vilna Gaon was against this minhag. Right here in this neighborhood, down the block, which is Shari Chesed shul, based on the Vilna Gaon's minhag. Why wait until after Yom Kippur to say Kiddush Levana? Maybe Kiddush Levana is going to be the one mitzvah that's going to tip the scale. So why wait? You can say it after the 3rd of the month, the 5th of the month, the 7th of the month. You can get it in before Yom Kippur. Why wait till the 11th of the month, which is, say, Yom Kippur? It's a halacha. It's a halacha. It's not just a minhag. It's a halacha.
I don't think that Achim was Valadim.
No, Kiddush Levana is known. Of course it's known. It's in the Rambam, for sure. Rambam says do Kiddush Levana. When you see the Levana b'chidusha, you're supposed to say the bracha. And the Rambam says immediately after Rosh Chodesh. Rambam didn't know from the 3rd, the 7th, he didn't know from that. The Kabbalists wait till the 7th. There's no question that they do it, but they may not do it dafka Motzei Shabbos. That's an Ashkenazi thing. But for sure. But the idea of deliberately delaying it until after Yom Kippur, the Vilna Gaon was diehard against it, because he says, we're looking to upgrade our mitzvah chart. So why should we delay a mitzvah? That's why some people start building their sukkah before Yom Kippur, because maybe that's going to be our one mitzvah that's going to tip the scale. So we're looking to upgrade. So that's what the Rambam says. We have upgraded tefillah, and the upgraded tefillah is called Slichot. And that's where the whole discussion began. So where does the Ashkenazi idea have that, that we start on the Motzei Shabbos? Why did that kick in? Where did the Motzei Shabbat idea come in? And I say again, the minhag of Ashkenaz to say it on Motzei Shabbat at midnight was in conformity with the Kabbalistic idea of saying Slichot every night at midnight, except Ashkenazim just picked it up for the one time, and it becomes type of an attraction. And now, in the last 50 years, that midnight has been watered down to, there's a minyan at midnight, but there's also slichas at 10 o'clock or 10:30, which draws the largest crowd. And then, as a corollary to that, there are going to be many shuls that will sponsor slichas the entire week, and including Aseret Mei at 10 p.m. Like they'll make a Ma'ariv at 9:45 or something like that, and then they'll say slichas. So it's just become acceptable. And Rav Moshe Feinstein raised this whole question, and he said that there's no prohibition to saying slichas before midnight. And even on Motzei Shabbos, that's what he really was kicking around the idea. Motzei Shabbos actually has a spirit of Shabbos. There is something about Motzei Shabbat, the idea of Malava de Malka. Some people see it as a Sudat Shabbat, even though it's after Shabbat. Do you know some people like candles by Malava Malka? It's a bona fide Sudat mitzvah. And do you know that there are some poskim that say that in the 3 weeks before, at least before Rosh Chodesh Av, where you can have at least one Shabbat of not the 9 days, you can have 2 Shabbatot, not the 9 days, that the Malava Malka of the 3 weeks, you can have music. You can have music because it's a Sudat mitzvah. It's a Sudat mitzvah. So there's something about Motzei Shabbat that's very much a spirit of simcha, and therefore it may not sit well with slichas, because slichas is a type of tefillah that's supposed to bring out the tears. It's supposed to be a tear-jerking type of tefillah of a serious nature, and may not be appropriate for the hours after Shabbat. But Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said, all right, we're not there. Most of us aren't breaking down and crying during slichas. And so he begrudgingly gave a green light to slichas at 10 o'clock at night, especially he felt if the local rabbi felt that people wouldn't be saying slichas at all, so it's better to say slichas at 10 o'clock at night than to miss it. That was his bottom line at the end of the day. So you could see how a posek was working, trying to say no, but then ultimately saying yes. And that's what he has for the nighttime slichas. So what does the Motzei Shabbos have to do with this? Motzei Shabbos has to do with Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi. Now we sing Eliyahu Hanavi songs on Motzei Shabbos, but why do we sing Eliyahu Hanavi songs on Motzei Shabbos? The Gemara says in Masechet Eruvin that based on the pasuk, Hinei Anochi Sholech Lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi Lifnei Bo Yom Hashem Hagadol V'Norah. It's the end of Sefer Malachi, that Eliyahu Hanavi is going to appear before that great day. So let's just say a word about that pasuk. The Rambam interprets the pasuk as being a prophecy for the restoration of prophecy. That there will be a day, there will be an era of no prophecy. Malachi is the last of the prophets. He's in the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash era. And he tells people, his final line is, Zchor Torat Moshe Avdi, please remember Torah's Moshe. There will be no more prophets to remind you of this. So I'm telling you to remember Torat Moshe. And then he signs off, and he says, Hinei Anochi Sholech Lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi. So Rambam says, this is the prophecy of the restoration of prophecy. but it may not be Eliyahu Navi. It may be Eliyahu Navi, but maybe somebody else who will be a prophet. And the Rambam says, Yesh min hachachamim sheomrim. There are chachamim who say that prior to the coming of Mashiach, Eliyahu is going to show up. Okay, Rambam says it's possible. But lo yada adam ma yiyu ad sheyu. Nobody really knows what's going to happen until it happens. So Rambam really believes that the prophecy of Malachi Hanavi, who said, Hinei anochi sholech lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi, is telling us that before the coming of Mashiach, there's going to be a restoration of prophecy. Will it be Mr. Eliyahu Hanavi himself? We're not sure. There are some who believe so, but there are those who don't believe so. The tone of the Rambam, Yesh min hachachamim, usually suggests a minority opinion. Yesh min hachachamim. There are some who actually believe this. There are some who entertain this possibility. Now, we all grew up with this, of Eliyahu Navi. Harachamanu yishlach lanu et Eliyahu Navi zachur latov, vivaser lanu b'sarot tovot yeshuot v'nechamot. We grew up with this, with Eliyahu Navi, and all of a sudden, you get a shock when you see this in the Rambam. Yesh ben hachachamim shomrim shekodem sheyavo haMashiach yavo Eliyahu. That Eliyahu is going to show up before Mashiach. Okay, some think so. If it happens, wonderful. If it doesn't happen, Mashiach's still going to come. But let's take the point of view of the very accepted that there's going to be an appearance of Eliyahu Navi. So the Gemara tells us in Masechet Eruvin that Eliyahu won't show up on a Friday. Why wouldn't he show up on a Friday? Can you imagine if Eliyahu Navi shows up on Friday? What's going to be with the children? What's going to be with the kugel? You've made all your Shabbos preparations and it's going to go down the tubes because everybody's going to be in a frenzy and is going to run outside and run to Yerushalayim and so on. It's going to bust up the Shabbos. That was the concern. It's going to bust up the Shabbos. So therefore, Eliyahu Navi has news for us. He's not coming on Friday. Oh, wow. Sigh with relief. Your children is going to make it, and your kugel is going to make it. Okay, great. So when is the first opportunity of Eliyahu Navi is going to show up? Motzei Shabbat. That's where it kicks in. That's where Eliyahu Navi and is associated with Motzei Shabbat. And you have all the songs of Eliyahu Navi, Eliyahu Tishbi for Motzei Shabbat. And the idea that this is the moment of the potential for the Geula. And what could be a better moment of starting Slichot than the moment of the potential arrival of Eliyahu Hanavi? So this is one of the reasons that Motzei Shabbat was actually favored. But it goes even further. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world. And Adam and Chava are created on day 6 of creation. Erev Shabbos. Erev Shabbos, right. And that Erev Shabbos was jam-packed with activity. The Gemara gives us the breakdown of every hour, what went on. I mean, he's able to impregnate Chava. She already has a child. A lot goes on. I'm telling you, there's an action-packed day. What goes on? And the idea of Adam and Chava sinning and being driven out. All this happens on Erev Shabbos. Okay, so let's just widen the angle, widen the lens to a very, very long Erev Shabbos. Okay. They didn't make early Shabbos that day. It must have been summertime. They didn't make early Shabbos that day, okay? Fine. However you're going to explain it. But the idea being that Adam and Chava sinned already on that Friday, the first day of creation. And what does the Torah say about eating from the Eitz Hadat? Ki biyom acholcha mimenu motamut. The day that you sin, your life is going to end. That's what it says. Now, Adam Rishon goes on to live for 930 years. That's pretty good. So what happened to biyom acholcha mimenu? Kadosh Baruch Hu forgave him on Shabbat. But with the forgiveness came some type of punishment that went along with but it was a type of punishment that would allow him to continue to live. I'm going to give you a halachic example. It's called malkot. Malkot means lashing. So we don't do this in a beit din because we don't have a beit din with the smicha of old any longer. But if a person violated a whole bunch of averot, many of them, So the penalty was malkot, like wearing shatnez, like cooking meat and milk, like eating chazer, all kinds of averot that if there was a beit din and you would be convicted, you'd get 39 lashes. The Gemara tells us, malkot bimkom mita omedet. Malkot is actually in place of capital punishment. What does that mean? There's even an opinion that, although it's not the halacha, it's an opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, that the judgment of malkot was in front of 23 judges, which is capital punishment case, even though they're not going to execute. But the person on trial should know how serious this is, that 23 judges are going to sit on the case. The idea of malkot bimkom mita emedet says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, don't, and you did it, your life is now over. Ki biyom acholcha mimenu mot tamut. But then came the Rachum v'Chanun, the compassionate God, and said, you know what? We're going to give you a few patch, and you're going to go on living. That's what malkot is. Malkot bimkom mita omedet. Adam Rishon was told, B'zeh atapecha tochal lechem. You're going to have a hard life, the way you're going to bring out your bread. It's not going to be a picnic, the life, outside of the Gan Eden, but you're going to survive. So this was, instead of the real punishment of ki biyom acholcha mimenu mot tamut. And when does he hear about this? He hears about this on Shabbat. Shabbat becomes an atoning moment, a forgiving moment for Adam Rishon. And according to Chazal, he composes Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat. And what does he do with, and what does God do with Adam and Chava, the first Motzei Shabbat? The first Motzei Shabbat. There was no canyon, there was no bowling, there was no ice skating. And Adam wants to take out Chava on a date. So what does he do? So Kadosh Baruch Hu sits them down and he teaches them how to rub stones together to bring out a spark of fire. And he teaches them how to make fire. And he teaches them that fire is not bisari and not chalavi. It's not milchiks or fleishiks. It's parv. It's what you do with it. You can build a beautiful world with fire. It is a source of light and energy and heat. Use it. Build with it. Be technologically advanced. And you're going to make a gorgeous world and a productive world. But you can also burn the whole world down with fire. It can become an agent of destruction. And how do we say this on Tisha B'Av by Mincha in Nachem? Ki ata Hashem be'esh hitzata u'be'esh atid livnota. You brought the Beit HaMikdash down with fire, you're going to rebuild it with fire. So what is fire? Is it bad or good? It's neither. It's par. It's what you do with it. You can make it into Eish, which is unbelievably important and helpful and positive. And you can make it into Eish HaMazik, one of the 4 of primary damages of Arba'a Avot Nezikin. It's up to you. And this was a lesson that Adam and Chava learned right after the first Shabbat. And they realized that Yom Rishon is the day of rebuilding the world. And what do we say every Sunday morning? Hayom Yom Rishon b'Shabbat, Shebo hayu halviyim omrim bebeit HaMikdash, Lashem ha'aretz umlo'ah, tevel v'yoshvei ba. You built the world. We are now entrusted with building our world. Or better yet, rebuilding our world. Sunday, Yom Rishon, becomes the day of rebuilding the world. When a person comes to Kadosh Baruch Hu before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, with a pekala, with a package of sins, he wants the spirit of Yom Rishon, which is Motzei Shabbat, to rebuild his spiritual world. And that's why Ashkenazim decided that the Slichos is going to be on Yom Rishon, but it's going to start already at nighttime. And what is one second, and what is nighttime? Nighttime is when everything is cloudy, everything is chaotic, and so on. Galut, exile, is always illustrated in Tanakh and by Chazal as the nighttime experience. And we start in the middle of our nighttime, and we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to bring us to the daytime. As the Rambam says, Ad she'ya'ir hayom, until the day is illuminated. And that's not just an astronomical fact, but it's also a spiritual fact. Yeah, come, please.
The idea of
Yeah.
He brought death into the world. There was no death.
Rambam doesn't believe that. No, the Rambam believes that human body was going to die. It's just that death was going to be a very pleasant experience of saying goodbye. Everybody's going to know when it's going to happen. And what happened after the sin, it became a tragic event when nobody would know and how it would happen and so on. Rambam says only HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Hayah Hoveh V'yeh, and human beings would have died. And the Rambam goes so far to say that even in the era of Tchiyat HaMetim, people will die because they necessarily have to die. Necessarily have to die. That's the Rambam. So you don't like it? Take somebody else. Go somebody else. All right. I'm going to collect the papers. I'm going to do this next week because we didn't even look at the poem yet, and we still have time next week because it's still before the Motzei Shabbat of Motzei Menucha. So this was a little bit of an introduction to the world of Slichot. Okay.